A lot of medical students want to do research in medical school, whether it is because they wanted to get into a competitive residency program or just out of curiosity. The end goal is usually the same. They want to get a publication. I get it, you have a research question, but it's very important to actually craft a blueprint of what you're going to do in your research project so that you can be as efficient as possible and have a really clear plan of what you're going to do. This is called a research proposal. And I have thought a lot about this, and I know this because I have published 2 papers when I was a medical student after spending more than a month doing research at Harvard. So today, I'm going to share with you 3 steps that you can use to write a great research proposal. So let's dive right in. The first step is super important. Step number 1 is actually, what is a research proposal? So a research proposal is actually a blueprint for what your research project is going to be. And it has a couple of different aspects. The first one is called your research question. This is showing and delineating what your research question is really all about. The second component is actually a background. What do we know about this? What has already been done about this? What are the studies up to this point that have talked about your topic? So that's the second piece. And the third piece, and one of the most important ones, is called the motivation. This is, why should we care about this research question? Why does it matter? So this is where you really tell the reader of the research proposal, why is this important? What has it done before? And why is there a research gap here? What has not been done before? And why we should do it. So this is the motivation. This is very important, and you should spend some time really thinking about this. And then the other key part is the methods. This is the nuts and bolts. What are you going to do? And what is the population? What is the data set? What are your outcomes? What is the main variable that you're going to use, called the independent variable? And we're going to talk about this in much more detail in later videos. But now, this is what you need to know. This is the nuts and bolts. So what are the covariates that you're going to use? And then what is your analysis? How are you going to answer your question? So this is step number 1. So step number 2 is actually, go ahead and start your research proposal with the background and the motivation. And as I said before, really spend some time with this here. You want to delineate and you want to be very crystal clear about what your research question really is. And I have actually done a whole video on how to craft your research question. So if you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out as well. Another very key thing is actually think about what has been done about your research in the past. What other papers are there? What other key papers are there? What is the line of investigation? What are the steps that have already been done leading to this point? This is super important because this is where you're going to find your research gap. Your research gap is actually, what is the topic that hasn't already been answered, and what is really the information missing here that you can capitalize on this and do your research project. So your research question should really try to address the research gap. The next part is actually motivating it. As I said before, this is really, why does it matter? Why should we pursue your research project? So this is something along the lines of, we know about this so far, we have identified a research gap, and this is why we should do it, because of X, Y, and Z. So this is your motivation. You should spend some time really crafting this. I cannot emphasize how important this is. After all, your research proposal will really guide your whole research paper. This is very important. And then the third step is really focusing on your method section. This is, how are you going to answer your research question and really address your motivation that you just crafted in step number 2. At this point, you don't need to be super detailed. Even bullet points are already good enough. So you really should spend some time on this. This is the population you're going to study. What is the data set that you are going to use? Is it a primary data set? Is it a secondary data set, meaning that someone has already collected the data and it's just sitting there? What are your outcomes, meaning what are you actually going to measure at the end of your study? And then what is the independent variable? And here I'm using some epidemiology terms. What is actually your main variable that you're going to study? For example, if you wanted to study the impact of diabetes on cardiovascular outcomes, this would be people who have diabetes or no as your independent variable, and then your outcomes are actually cardiovascular disease measures. And then here you also would include things like covariates, So these are other variables that you may need to account for in your study. So this may be things like age, being on medications, diabetes severity, prior complications of diabetes. So all of these things could potentially influence the association between diabetes and cardiovascular disease. This is by no means a comprehensive list of covariates, but these are just some things to think about as you plan your research proposal. The next part is, what is your analytic plan? How are you actually going to do the analysis? What type of models are you going to use? Are you going to use a linear regression? Are you going to use discontinuity? Are you going to use an analysis that actually accounts for binary variables? So all of this you should be thinking about and be as specific as possible. Don't worry, your mentor will actually help you with this in the long run, but this is just something really good for you to start thinking about as you plan your research project. So summarizing, this is how you craft a really good research proposal. First, really getting to know what the parts of the research proposal are. What are your research question, the background, the motivation, and then the method section. So this is really your research proposal. The second step is really focusing on the foundational aspects of your research project. What is your background and what is the motivation for your study? So what do we know? And the second part is why does it matter? And then the third step is really to focus on the method section. So again, don't worry about this. It doesn't need to be overly detailed just yet. Now you just want to get your ideas on paper. So this is how I would actually craft a research proposal. By having a great research proposal, you're setting yourself up for research success. See you next time.